topic will be the revenue manager of tomorrow. So it will be a view of the function of revenue management, especially, of course, in the CPG field, where we are focusing our work on in revenue management. I think it's also a topic in hospitality industry, but that's not what we mean here today. We're really focusing on the consumer goods aspect of it. We'll learn a lot about where revenue management came from, how it got consolidated, and what's the next unlock for CPGs in terms of that harmonization across their organization. And that's a topic that at least my clients have been discussing with me in the past few months as well. Kind of what are the best ways of organizing that, or how do you get from your current step in your revenue management journey to the next one. So happy to have this as a webinar today. Ingo, let's maybe do a quick intro of the moderators today. So Ingo, our co-founder and managing director at Buynomics, founded the company and worked over 14 years in pricing and revenue management. He also developed our unique Buynomics method, which I think we'll touch upon towards the end of this webinar. So stay tuned in terms of what the future looks like from our view. And I'm Paul. I'm leading sales at Buynomics. We'll be kind of moderating the session. I will also be answering some of your questions in the chat. So do use the chat, please, for the Q&A to share your ideas, knowledge, and questions with the rest of the audience. Or you can use our Q&A to address Ingo and me directly. You'll see all of that down here in the toolbar. So I'll be moderating from there, and then also pose your questions to Ingo at the end of the session. So before we get into the content, just a quick word about Buynomics. We are a revenue management software provider with a novel software. I think the second iteration of our software is actually just about to be published. So stay tuned for the new looks, for the new capabilities there. But the core method and the approach is still the same. It's getting better, of course, every day. But it's really around having a holistic single source of truth for revenue managers, having high accuracy and speed to insights from a software first approach. And in the end, that yields a lot better results than the status quo. So if you want to learn more about that, please be in touch by LinkedIn, by email, or answer our follow-up email on Monday, where you will also receive, and this is the most frequently asked question, you will receive the recording and the slides of this webinar on Monday or Tuesday. So look into your inbox for that as well. But with that, I hand over to Ingo for the good part of the webinar here, and I'll be available in the chat for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for the introduction, and everyone in this webinar for attending. I just want to comment on what Paul said. So it's not really the second iteration. There have been lots, hundreds, thousands of iterations we've already done, but this is like I would say, after starting the biggest improvement. We'll speak on that in a few weeks, but it's a major improvement in the solution that we're building. And with that, let's start into the topic revenue management. And I think it makes sense to get an understanding of where the field is, and I think what better and talk about the importance of the topic. What better way than to look into companies' annual reports where CEOs and the C-level in general discuss what are their main topics. And when you do this, you will find strategic revenue management being discussed quite a lot. And typically in the context of it being one of the key activities, key features where companies expect growth and profitability to come from. So it's really at the core of I would say most of the large companies and small companies as well. Top management, and I think that's what also for us makes it interesting and important to do. Maybe with this, I think where we are as a discipline, and I'm really happy to discuss at the end. I think we've had a number of webinars that were a bit longer than 30 minutes. This one's we aim to be have 2 or 3 minutes at the end to discuss. So if there's anything you want to discuss in the context, if we say something and you disagree, please put it into the comments, and we're happy to discuss this towards the end of the webinar. Really looking forward to this part. So where do we come from as a discipline? I think in most companies, and some I would say are still early on that journey, many of the key functions that are now put together in or constitute revenue management, like pricing, PPA, pack price architecture, channel mix, and so on, were really performed in separate units across the organization. Pricing, for example, being done in finance or marketing, whereas PPA also being done by consumer insights, and then tasks that are closer to the end customer, like promotions, were being done by sales. So really in different sets of the organization. And of course, this causes obvious friction. For me, the most obvious example of why it's difficult when you have these key decisions that belong together being performed in at different times and in different departments. It's not from CPG, but from automotive, where I've worked also quite a lot in my previous life, where when you build a new car, you have essentially what they do is they first plan the factory. They say, okay, we'll build this factory, and it's supposed to build 100,000 cars per year. Then at the later stage, they decide on what cars they want to build, what engines to put in. So they define essentially the pack architecture. And then in the end, shortly before they start selling the first vehicles, they think about pricing. And by then already, with volume being set, the product being set, there's not so much that pricing can really do to optimize. And it's really often being used as something just to cover up or to fix the problems that were being done much earlier in the cycle by saying, okay, we need to have total sales of 100,000 and we need to sell these cars. There's not too much that pricing then can do. It can fix, it can close that equation, but it cannot at the same time optimize profit or optimize revenue, depending on what the company is aiming for. So these things really need to be put together, and this is what we're seeing in many companies that have already started this a couple of years ago or are currently in the process of really integrating these different tasks and having essentially the RGM function together within one organization. You could say this is like the first wave in an integration towards the revenue management of the future, coming from having these functions spread across different departments and companies being performed at different times, towards now an integration of these different functions put together in one unit that then covers what we typically identify as the key 5 levers that we have in revenue management. And those are pricing, PPA, channel mix, trade promotions, and trade terms. So putting these different functions together. And this is, I would say, as I said, where many companies are at the moment. The problem, of course, is, and what we see is that it's being put together into one organization. But what is obvious or is clear that these things are, as functions, are still very interdependent, right? And an easy way to see this is if you put it into a price demand chart like this one. So it's super simplified, and it only serves here to highlight the general idea. In reality, with many products, competition and everything, this is obviously much more complicated. But I think it's useful to think of these relationships in these terms here. So what do we see here? So we see demand, sales here as a function of price. And usually what this means, you have these shoppers here at the bottom, potential customers, and you have a price, P1, everyone who is willing to pay more for the product. So these blue people here, they will buy the product, whereas the orange people, the position where they stand highlights their willingness to pay. Those with the willingness to pay below the price typically will not buy the product. And everything you do when you move your end consumer price, this is essentially a movement up and down this demand curve. If you think about pack price architecture, changing the size of a product, this is typically thought of in terms of moving the demand curve up or down. When you have promotions, these are typically two different things. Typically, promotions consist of two things. One is a price reduction. So essentially you move from P1 to a price P2 that's slower than the price. And you have an uplift in the demand curve because you promote the product. So demand is higher than what you would get if you just reduce the price. So everything, and the same with trade terms, for example, if you're a manufacturer, trade terms affect essentially your costs and your net price. So everything you do affects the same graph, and that makes clear that these things really are interdependent, right? So when you think about pack architecture, that strongly interacts with your pricing, same for trade terms and promotions. Maybe a price increase in your list price makes sense, but another price works better with a certain promotion. So these things are really interdependent, and we would claim that this is what's from the work that we do is something that's missing already still in many organizations, that these different methods that are being used are already integrated. And I will show one simple example what we mean. And the example that we have here is the comparison of a pack price architecture versus a pricing logic. Let's first think about the pack price architecture, and this graph is one of the standard graphs that are being used. What does it show? It shows a portfolio that we have consists of these 4 products. Again, super simplified, and we have 4 products ranging from 250 gram, 500, 750, and 1000 gram. And here on the y-axis, we have the price per kilogram, 100 gram. And everyone would expect, of course, that the price goes down with the size. So, and the idea is that you first of course the costs already typically decrease with larger pack size, the cost per weight unit, but also what you want to do is you want to incentivize your shoppers to move from smaller packs to larger packs. And one of the typical heuristics that we see a lot is that really comes from the more traditional pricing world, is that you say, okay, we need to have, when we move from a smaller pack to a larger pack, we need to have decrease in the price per unit by something like 10 or 15%, right? And if you apply this logic to this graph here, you would see, you can already see it graphically, that the 750 is a little bit outside of this logic. You would expect the 750 to be typically within this PPA logic to be a bit cheaper. This is, again, super simplified. In most practical work, you would also not just look at your curve here, but you would also look at the competitor curve, all kinds of things. But what is key is that when you then look at the price elasticities for these products, it might be that the price elasticity for the 750 gram is, let's say, minus 0.9. And that means that if you increase the price of that product, let's say by 10%, you will lose 9% in sales. And because elasticity is between 0 and -1, a price increase increases revenue, and also it increases profit. So from what we're seeing here is that from a PPA logic, you would be inclined to decrease the price of this product. From a pricing logic, you would be inclined to increase the price of this product. And it's really unclear how to then bring all of these things together. I would say what I've seen in most cases, when there are these different logics, you either have the teams either have something sequential where they first run through a PPA logic, put it into a structure, particularly if there are new products that they have, and then they have differentiated price increases that are a little bit contrary to the initial PPA logic. So this is one thing you see. Another is that teams reapply these different logics, price according to the PPA logic, price according to the pricing logic, and then just take an average of the different methods. Other alternatives that often come into play are then maybe a competitive price logic. We say, okay, we can our product is a bit better, our brand is a bit better than those of our competitors, we can be 5% more expensive, and then just average all of these different methods. And everyone kind of, I would say, kind of feels that that typically doesn't produce the best results. And I think that's really where we see essentially the next wave in revenue management coming, that we move from these very separate methods. I think it's legitimate to look at a graph like this, but really to move towards the integration of these different methods. And this is what we would suggest is essentially the second wave in revenue management. And we're happy to discuss this if you see something, if you see this differently from us. Happy to discuss this towards the end of this webinar, but this is really what we see as the second wave in RGM management. The first one being moving from having all the functions spread across different divisions in the organization, different people working on pricing, different people working on sales or promotions, integrating this into one department that does all of it together, but still largely with different methods that are not well integrated. And now the second wave is really the integration of the methods and tools to have an integrated solution that helps team optimize across these different functions. As we said in the beginning, we have been at different conferences in the past, and we asked RGM teams that participated in different at these different conferences. We've been at Toronto, Barcelona, Dublin, all over the place in the past weeks. Asked everyone the same question: what are the most important topics that you're faced at the moment? And we kind of aggregated all of this together. And what was really very consistent across geographies and teams is that everyone sees, and I think that comes at no surprise for most of you, inflation, or maybe the move or the threat of deflation, and already in some categories, is what's most pressing to most people in the RGM field. Then the next one, also very consistent across areas, was the question of private labels, the importance of that, and further topics that we found are, for example, changing consumer behavior in different regions, and more limited, I would say, to Europe rather than North America in this case. What's the importance of regulation and how to deal with that? So I would say those are the most pressing topics, and we just want to take the first one, inflation, deflation, to discuss what it means to integrate across these different methods and tools. First, to get started, let's look at this very simple graph. So let's say you have, again, this price-volume relationship. You have a demand curve. Just for simplicity, an exponential demand. That means that the price elasticity is constant for all prices. Let's say in this example, we have a constant price elasticity of -2. Then it's really easy from a pricing perspective to compute the optimal price. It's simply the price times the cost times this term here, including only the elasticity. And when you put in, for example, -2 and you have cost of 100, you see that the optimal price is 200 euros. To simplify this a little bit, you always know from, if you're just looking at a single product and you're looking at, if you know the price elasticity of the product and you know the costs, then in the optimum, price elasticity times margin is always -1. So that's when you know you have the right price. So now, let's say we have inflation, cost inflation, costs go from 100 to 110. Your margin should stay the same at 50%. In this case, as the elasticity is constant, the optimal price would move from 200 to 220 in this case. If you're in a deflationary environment and your costs decrease from 100 to 90, your new profit optimum would be 180. So this is very simple. If you then have put this again in the context of the PPA example that we just had here, if you go back to that graph, when we have this curve and these are our prices, and now you have a cost increase, it's not really clear, particularly if the different sizes are affected differently by the cost increase, what you do, right? So it's really tricky to bring these different contexts into harmonization if you're just looking at these separate solutions for the different questions. So what often happens, just to conclude this part here, is that you set up a pricing logic or a pack price architecture, and then you have cost increases over a number of years, and then you end up in something like this example that one has run out of the structure, and then you're faced with the question, should I bring it back to the structure or not? But this is really because you have applied different logics at different stages of the evolution of the price of the products. So this is where you are, and I think if you're just looking at papers or looking at slides and the simplistic traditional methods, then this is really what you get. And I just want to show a brief example, and I ask my colleague Paul if you can see my new screen.
Not yet, but waiting in suspense. There we go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is a super simple example that we set up. I don't want to in this webinar really go into the technology underneath, but essentially in this example we are really simplifying reality. We are living in a world where we have like a lemonade stand in front of our house. Our neighbor has the same. We sell apples. Our neighbor sells pears. We have essentially the same cost us 50 cents, and the price of each fruit is 130. And we have, let's say, in a week that we're selling around 1,000 people who come by our houses and then make a decision to buy our product or our competitor's product. And in this case, about half of the 1,000 people who come by buy either one of these products. And we can see, and this is also one of the key topics on, if we think about price elasticity. Let's say we increase our price, we go from 130 to 140. We see that we have a price elasticity of 2.9. If our competitor also increases the price, it already goes down from 2.9 to 1.5. And this is, of course, because the alternative has become less attractive because it's also more expensive. So in this case, we lose 50 units. About half go to our competitor, half will not buy anything anymore because they just wanted the apple. And if we also take the alternative out, then we have much lower prices. So if we look at an example like this, to move these pictures here. If we look at it at an example like this, it's really easy to see. We have typically like these demand curves. We're interested in profit, and we see, and this is the context how this relates to inflation. We had inflation, we had increased our cost, and now we're again in an environment where the actual inflation willingness to pay hasn't developed as we expected, and we're a little bit too expensive, right? So this is our profit curve. We are selling at 130. We have increased. Let's go back to the 130 case. Increase the price of 130, and we see we're a bit too expensive. Maybe we're better off when we go to 110, but that, as these things are interdependent, puts our competitor at a worse position, and maybe there's an optimum somewhere around here, €1 or 110, where the profit optimum is, and neither one can improve further by reducing the price. So this would be like a competitive equilibrium in this case. So this is what we can do with pricing, but we are now integrating different ideas. So we are not only looking at pricing, but we might also consider a pack architecture. And that means in this simple example that we're not selling the apple anymore that we sold before, but we're now selling a large apple and a small apple. And the large apple measuring unit here is, there's a standard apple size or pear size. And in this case, we are increasing the size of the apple, so it's 50% larger, and the small apple is 80% smaller. And this gives us sort of a pack architecture in this very simple example. And we see that we have here the price per measuring unit. And this really allows us to not only, as in, if you think back to the slide that we showed, where you only had this relation where you were only looking at price per measurement unit, but it doesn't really tell you if you're optimal or not, right? And with this, you can really combine the different logics. We have price elasticities that again depend on what else is going on. And just to conclude this example, you can also, and this is what's important when you're solving specific challenges, like what to do in an inflationary environment. And in this example, if you've overshot with the price increase, you have these units, and you might consider, for example, the price decrease. You might consider having a price promotion in 30% of the days. So if you have a week of 7 days, then you would have 2 or 3 days of price promotion, or you increase the value, so you move from just an apple to a large apple, or you might, and that was the example that we just looked at, go to a case where you are selling the large apple and the small apple. Here in this example, the large sales are smaller because the large apple is 160, and here it was, it was 130, and here it's 160 because we have a big architecture. And of course, you can also then look at profitability of these things and look at the market shares that you have. So this was just a simple example to highlight what it means from our point of view to integrate these different ideas. Let me just go back to the presentation. Or can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, so this was really a very simple example. Of course, you can do this with real life-size examples with large portfolios and different offers, different promotions in every week or day to cover the real complexity of your situation. And what we really think is that the revenue management of the future, the first wave that we have seen that's still going on in many companies, is moving from having the different RGM tasks and levers, pricing, tag architecture, trade terms, and so on, being put together in one organizational unit, and in many companies at the moment still with tools that are not well integrated, as we showed in the example of the PPA versus pricing logic. And we really think that the way forward, at the next key wave, is really integrating different data sources, sellout data, for example, with survey data, integrating these different methods, as we have highlighted in the Apple example, and with this being able to then come to integrated decisions, so that you don't have separate promotion decisions, for example, from promotion decisions separated from price decisions, but having it all integrated. And I think with this we come closer to, I think, the vision we all have of what the revenue management of the future will really look like, where we have it all together in one screen and can optimize our pricing. Paul?
Perfect. Thanks, Ingo, for the session, bringing together kind of the siloed view of the past, where we are at the moment, and then what the future could look like from an org and a tool perspective, obviously. Don't have any questions in the chat, so please do ask away if you have any. I have one here in the Q&A about the data that you need to have a single source of truth about PPA pricing, for instance, in this instance.
Yeah, so just very briefly, so the technology that's underneath this, that's what we developed, is what we call virtual shoppers. And the idea is that we create a very large number, thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands, depending on the context of these virtual shoppers, that behave together like real shoppers. So in this Apple example, you can show them your products and new prices, or you can show them different products, changes in size and so on. And then they will make decisions like real shoppers. And that gives you the ability to predict very precisely what will happen when you make these changes, and then allows you to make better decisions. And these virtual shoppers can really be parameterized from different data sources. Relevant data sources are sellout data, for example, that reflect real shoppers' decisions, but also survey data. So for example, if you're interested or thinking about introducing something new, a new brand or a new packaging for a product, anything, a new attribute, new taste that hasn't been in the market, so there's no real data on it, you can get these insights from a survey and integrate them into the existing model that's based on sales data, which really is robust on the past, on the existing attributes, and you have then integrated the new attributes that you're looking for. And this typically gives much more robust insights into what will happen when you make these changes in the future.
Perfect. We're at time, Ingo, and I do want to highlight our next webinar, which is on crucial pricing KPIs, understanding and measuring and optimizing for success, which I think will be a industry agnostic webinar, so also quite interesting for colleagues outside of the consumer goods space. Jonathan did share the registration for that on Zoom, but you will also get an opportunity in your inbox on Monday. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you there. If you do have any questions, as always, reach out on LinkedIn or email. We put our profiles there in the chat, so happy to connect if you have any questions. And otherwise, happy weekend.
Happy weekend, and hope to see you next time. Goodbye.